"Put this on. You're serving drinks tonight, Georgina." My mother, Tina, said it while fixing her earrings in the hallway mirror, not even turning around. I was 26 years old, standing in my childhood home, holding a black server's uniform with staff printed on the front. My brother Fabian was getting engaged that night to Jess Sterling, daughter of Anthony Sterling, and my mother decided, without asking me, that I'd be working as a waitress at the party instead of sitting at a table like his sister. "You cannot be serious," I said. "Anthony Sterling is going to be in that room tonight. Senators, board members. I am not having you standing around telling people you do something with computers. You'll make Fabian look small." That was my mother, 40 years of practice turning her own daughter into something she needed to hide. I want to tell you exactly what happened 2 hours later when Anthony Sterling looked at my face and dropped his glass on the floor in front of 50 guests. But first, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Here's the short version of my life. I grew up watching my brother get everything first: the car, the tuition, the attention, while I built computers on a card table in the garage because my mother said it made the house look messy. Nobody in my family thought I'd amount to much. At 19, I left with $400 and a duffel bag. 10 years later, I run a company that handles data security for half the finance firms on the East Coast. My mother still thinks I fix laptops for a living because I never corrected her. What she didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, my company had agreed to put $2.4 billion into Sterling Dynamics to save it from collapse. Anthony Sterling's empire was one bad week from bankruptcy, and my signature was the only thing keeping it alive. I was set to close the deal Monday morning. I put the uniform on, not because she scared me into it, because I wanted to see exactly how far she'd go, in a room where I already held all the power, and she had no idea. I spent the first hour carrying trays through the crowd, invisible in a room of people who never looked at my face. Around 7:30, the doors opened. Anthony Sterling walked in with his security team. He took a glass of champagne off my tray without looking at me. Then he looked up. His face went white. The glass slipped out of his hand and shattered on the floor. The sound of that glass hitting the floor was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Every conversation in the ballroom just stopped. The string quartet in the corner just stopped playing mid-note. 50 people turned to look at Anthony Sterling standing frozen in front of me, staring at my face like he'd seen a ghost. A waiter near the bar froze mid-pour. Somebody's fork clinked against a plate and then went quiet too, like even that small sound was too loud for the room. "Wait," Anthony said. His voice actually shook. "You're Georgina Richardson?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, holding my empty tray, in my cheap black uniform, letting him say my name out loud in front of my entire family. "You run Vantage Secure," he said. It wasn't a question anymore. His security guard, a big man named Jorge, took a step closer to him, unsure what was happening, scanning the room like he expected a threat. "You're the one financing my company." Behind him, I saw my mother's face change. Tina had been halfway across the room, laughing with some woman from the club, holding a glass of wine like she owned the place. Now she was walking towards us fast, heels clicking against the marble, and her face had an expression I'd never seen on her before. Not anger, fear. I need to back up for a second, because you won't understand why this moment mattered so much unless you know what happened to me at 19. My mother didn't just neglect me growing up, she actively worked to make sure I stayed small. When I won a state technology competition in high school, an actual scholarship opportunity, judges from 3 different universities flying in to watch the finals, she told me I couldn't go to the ceremony because it was the same weekend as Fabian's 16th birthday party. I begged her. I told her this was my one shot at a full ride. She looked at me over her coffee and said, "Your brother needs this more than you need a trophy." That same night, I heard her on the phone with my father, Wilbert, talking about money. She'd taken $11,000 out of the account my grandmother left for my education, money that was legally mine, and used it to buy Fabian a car for his birthday. I was standing outside their bedroom door in the dark hallway when I heard that. Something in me just went cold and quiet, and it never fully warmed back up. I left 3 months later, 19 years old, one duffel bag, $400 folded in my sock. My mother told me I'd be back within a year, broke and humiliated. She said nobody hires a girl who plays with computers all day instead of getting a real degree. She was wrong about it all, and now, in front of 50 of the wealthiest people in Colorado, that mistake was standing in a waiter's uniform holding an empty tray, and there was no version of tonight where she could talk her way out of it. "Mr. Sterling," my mother said, arriving breathless, her voice climbing an octave higher than usual. She didn't even turn to look at her. "Tina," Anthony's voice cut through hers like a blade. He didn't even turn to look at her. "This woman," Anthony said, loud enough now that it carried to every corner of the ballroom, "is the reason my company still exists next week. She is personally financing a $2.4 billion rescue of Sterling Dynamics, and you have her serving drinks at your son's engagement party." I watched my brother Fabian's face go through about 4 different emotions in 3 seconds, standing near the head table in his rented tuxedo. Confusion, disbelief, then something that looked almost like fear, like he was already calculating what this meant for him. My mother turned to look at me, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched her realize she had absolutely no idea who her own daughter had become. "Georgina," she said quietly, her voice small in a way I'd never heard her before. "Is this true?" I set the tray down near the nearest table, next to a floral centerpiece taller than my head. My hands weren't shaking. I'd waited 10 years for this exact moment, and now that it was here, I felt strangely calm, almost like I was watching it happen to someone else. "Every word," I said. Anthony's daughter, Jess, the bride-to-be, stepped up beside her father in her white engagement dress, staring at me with wide eyes like she was trying to place my face from somewhere. Behind her, I caught sight of Anna, my mother's sister, standing near the bar with her hand pressed over her mouth, already whispering to the woman next to her. "I have a question for you, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice steady enough that it carried across the whole silent room. "I want you to ask her what she did with my college fund." The room went dead silent again. My mother's face turned the color of the tablecloth behind her, and for once in her life, she had absolutely nothing to say. Nobody moved for a few seconds. Then my mother laughed, a short, brittle sound with no humor in it at all. "Georgina, don't do this," she said, glancing around at the crowd that was now openly staring. "Not here, not tonight." "You mean don't do this in front of people who matter to you," I said. "That's always been the rule, right? Anything true about our family only counts if nobody important is listening." Anthony held up a hand, and the whole room seemed to lean in to hear him. "Answer her question, Tina. What college fund?" My mother's mouth opened and closed. My father, Wilbert, who'd been quiet near the bar the entire night, he was always quiet. That was his whole personality, quiet and invisible and useless when it counted. Finally walked over. He looked older than I remembered, smaller. "Georgina, sweetheart," he started. "Don't," I said. "You stood outside that door with me, Dad. You heard the same phone call I did. You just never said anything, because you never do." He didn't argue. That told me everything. Fabian pushed through the crowd then, his face red, his tie already loosened like he'd been sweating for the last 10 minutes. "This is my engagement party," he said. "Can we not do a family therapy session in front of the Sterlings?" "You mean the family you were about to marry into, using a house built on money that was supposed to be mine." That landed. I watched it land. Jess looked at her fiancé with an expression I hadn't seen on her face all night. Not love, not embarrassment, something more like reassessment, like she was doing the same math her father had just done about me, except about him. Anthony crossed his arms. $11,000 doesn't explain the tone in this room, Georgina. There's more here. He was right. There was. When I was 19, I said, loud enough that the caterers near the kitchen doors stopped what they were doing to listen, I asked my mother for $4,000 to cover a security deposit near my first apartment near the university. I had a partial scholarship. I just needed a place to live while I worked nights to cover the rest. She told me the family didn't have it. I looked at Fabian. 2 weeks later, you got a car nobody in this family could actually afford, and I found out, years later, exactly where that money came from. That's not fair, Tina said, her voice cracking now. You don't understand what it's like raising 2 children with completely different needs. I understand exactly what it's like, I said. I lived it. I'm the one who left home at 19 with $400 and no help from anyone in this family and build something you don't even understand well enough to be embarrassed about tonight. Anthony was watching me carefully now, and I could see him running calculations behind his eyes, not about the money, but about me, about what kind of person survives what I survived and comes out the other side controlling $2 billion of someone else's future. Ms. Richardson, he said, switching to my last name now, formal, careful, I'd like to understand something. Is my deal with your company in jeopardy because of what's happening in this room right now? It was a fair question. It was also exactly the question I'd been waiting for. That depends, I said. On what? I looked at my mother one more time. She was standing very still, her wineglass forgotten on a nearby table, watching me the way you watch a car crash you can't stop. On whether anyone in my family tries to use tonight's conversation against me, I said, because I built a very specific clause into every deal I sign, Mr. Sterling. I don't do business with people who think loyalty runs in one direction. Anthony's jaw tightened. My mother's face went pale in a completely different way before, not from embarrassment anymore, but from fear of what I might actually mean. What clause? She asked, quietly. I picked my tray back up off the table, just to feel the weight of it in my hands one more time. I'll tell you Monday morning, I said, right before I decide if this family gets to keep anything at all.
Nobody in that ballroom moved for what felt like a full minute. Anthony Sterling finally broke the silence. Miss Richardson, whatever this clause is, I need you to be straight with me. My company's survival depends on Monday. I know exactly what your company depends on, I said. I built the terms myself. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice like that would somehow make this conversation private in a room full of 50 witnesses. Georgina, whatever you're planning, think about your brother. Think about his future. I have thought about it, actually, ever since I found out you spent my grandmother's money on a car for a 16-year-old who still, to this day, has never once asked me a single question about my life. Fabian's face went tight. That's not true. When's my birthday? I asked him. He blinked. He genuinely didn't know. I watched him try to guess and fail, and something in his expression finally cracked. Not guilt exactly, more like the sudden, uncomfortable realization that he'd built his entire adult life without ever once wondering who I was. Anthony cleared his throat. I don't want to rush anyone's family reckoning, but I have board members flying in Monday morning expecting a signature. I need to know if that signature is still coming. I turned to face him directly. It is. The deal was never in question. I don't let personal history interfere with business decisions. That's exactly the discipline that got me here instead of stuck in that house. Relief moved through his shoulders, visible even from where I stood. But,
I continued, there is one change I'm making to the agreement before Monday, and I want my family to hear it now, since they're the reason I'm making it. My mother's hand found my father's arm, gripping it. Wilbert didn't pull away this time. For once, he looked like he was actually paying attention. The original terms included a personal guarantee, a clause allowing my company first right of refusal on any future Sterling family business ventures, including anything tied to your daughter's engagement. Standard language, since Fabian was about to become extended family through this engagement. Jess's eyes went wide. She looked at Fabian, then back at me. I'm removing that clause, I said, effective tonight, because after this conversation I don't want any legal or financial connection between my company and anyone standing in this room who isn't Mr. Sterling himself. The meaning of that landed slowly, then all at once. If the clause was gone, there was no financial tie between the Richardsons and the Sterling fortune, meaning whatever Fabian thought he was marrying into, walking away with, benefiting from, was never going to touch our family at all. Wait, Fabian said, his voice actually cracked. You're saying I get nothing out of this? You were never supposed to get anything out of this, I said. You were supposed to marry someone you claim to love. If money was ever part of your reason for being here, that's a conversation you need to have with yourself, not me. Jess stepped back from him, just slightly, but enough that everyone in that ballroom saw it. My mother's voice came out in a whisper. Georgina, please, we're your family. I looked at her for a long moment. 10 years of silence, one duffel bag, $400, and every locked door in that garage came back to me all at once, but none of it made me angry anymore. It just made me tired. You had 26 years to treat me like family. You spent every one of them treating me like a mistake you were managing. I'm not interested in the label now that it's convenient for you. I turned back to Anthony. The paperwork will be ready Monday at 9. I'll have my legal team send the revised terms tonight. He nodded slowly, still processing everything that had just happened in front of his own daughter and half the guest list. There's one more thing, I said, and something in my voice must have shifted because the whole room went quiet again. My mother's face went white. What are you talking about? She asked. I set my tray down one final time. The house you're standing in right now, the one you used for tonight's party instead of your own home, because you said it needed renovations. I know why you couldn't host this at your house. Her breath caught. I know about the loan, Mom. My mother's face went completely white under the ballroom lights. How do you know about that? She said. It wasn't even a question anymore. It was an admission. Because I own the data infrastructure that half the banks in this state run their loan systems through, I said. I wasn't looking for it. It came up during a routine security audit 6 weeks ago, completely unrelated to any of you. Your name flagged because you'd taken a second mortgage on the house using my father's signature. Wilbert's head snapped toward her. You did what? Wilbert, I can explain. You forged my signature? His voice actually broke on the last word. 10 years of silence from that man, and this was what finally cracked him open. I didn't forge anything. My mother stammered, looking around at the crowd still watching, still listening, still recording this entire unraveling in their heads, if not on their phones. I needed the money for tonight, for the venue, the flowers, the caterers. I was going to pay it back once Fabian and Jess were married, once there was family money to draw from. And there it was, the whole shape of the evening laid bare in one sentence. She'd bet our family's actual house on a wedding that was supposed to fix everything, using money that wasn't hers for a marriage that was never about love in the first place. Anthony looked physically ill. "You planned to pay back a fraudulent loan using my daughter's marriage." "That's not how I'd put it," Tina said weakly. "That's exactly how I'd put it," Jess said, speaking for the first time all night. She looked at Fabian, then at her father, then finally at me. "I need some air." She walked out through the side doors without looking back. Fabian didn't follow her. I think some part of him already knew there was nothing left to follow. Anthony turned to me one last time. "Ms. Richardson, I'm sorry you had to find out about your family this way, in front of all these people. I found out about my family a long time ago. Tonight just made it official for everyone else. I want to tell you what happened over the following weeks, because it wasn't dramatic. It was just quiet and complete, the way real consequences usually are. The bank called in the mortgage fraud within a month once Wilbert refused to cover for her and filed a police report of his own. My mother lost the house. My father moved into a small apartment near his brother, and for the first time since I was a kid, started answering my calls. We don't talk often, but we talk. Fabian and Jess never got married. Anthony made sure every firm in his network knew exactly why the engagement ended, and Fabian spent the next year discovering what it's like to apply for jobs without a family name doing the work for him. Last I heard, he was working retail management in Denver. Not a tragedy, just an ordinary life, the kind he never had to build any skills for until now. I don't carry anger about it anymore. I just don't let anyone hand me a uniform again.